Council will consider a first reading of an ordinance to adopt the I-77 South Corridor Small Area Plan as an addition to York Forward, the 2035 York County Comprehensive Plan, pursuant to the Code of Laws of South Carolina, Title VI, Chapter 29, entitled South Carolina Local Government Comprehensive Planning Enabling Act of 1994, to hold a public hearing to provide for other matters related thereto.
Good evening, Council. I'm Jonathan Warno, Assistant Planning Director. Gary, if you go to the beginning of the presentation. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So, as way of a bit of background on this small area plan effort, last year, Council adopted a set of strategic goals, one of those being a growth management goal. An implementation strategy for that growth management goal was to identify 3 to 4 areas to study and address the impacts of future growth. So the I-77 corridor, the I-77 South corridor, was identified as the first of these areas to study, the second of which being Lake Wiley, and the third being a reevaluation of the Dave Lyle extension plan, which is already part of our comprehensive plan. So one of the reasons that the I-77 South corridor was identified as an area to study is its importance to the sustained economic growth in the county. Another being the development pressures that are in the county, in this area of the county, with the Panthers development coming in with a lot of large undeveloped properties in the southern portion of the corridor that are available for development, and a lot of the conflicts between growth and the rural edge. So this corridor does have a mix of the city of Rock Hill, a lot of industrial development, as well as rural homesteads and suburban styled neighborhoods. So there's some natural conflicts between those land uses. So the study area itself is identified as unincorporated York County within a 2-mile buffer of I-77 on either side, south of the Catawba River. So for reference on this particular map, that is the color blue. City of Rock Hill, for reference, is shaded gray. Fort Mill is shaded brown, and the Catawba Indian Nation is shaded green on this map. So the goal for this small area plan is to maximize the corridor's economic development potential as the county's transportation spine, while simultaneously minimizing the impacts of new development on existing residential areas. So in the course of staff's analysis on this small area plan, we looked at several different factors. First being economic development. So what are the employment trends in this particular corridor and the county at large? Where are the future job growth potential? Where is that? And what are the needs for that job growth to be realized? On transportation, we looked at where some of the most high volume roads are located, as well as the proposed and being implemented infrastructure projects, where those are located currently, as well as where truck routes might go with new development coming in. Additionally, we looked at utilities, so where are the Rock Hill water and sewer lines currently in existence, and how might those serve or expand in the future? We looked at existing land uses, so where are those employment uses now? Where are schools? Where are other institutional type uses, just to make sure that we're identifying where those are currently as they're developed. We looked at the underlying zoning districts in the corridor, so the future development potential across the corridor, what people can do by right with the property that they currently own. We also looked at the existing comprehensive plan guidance, so in the future, what is the current plan recommending be built? Additionally, we met several times with the City of Rock Hill's planning department. They gave us feedback on some of the recommendations that we were working on, as well as some of the issues in the corridor, so we factored in their input as well. During the whole process, the public was heavily involved. At the outset of the project, we had a public survey that went out. We had over 1,500 respondents and several hundred open-ended responses that staff read through all of them, I promise you that. We incorporated a lot of that feedback that we received into the recommendations that are included in the plan. We also had 2 public meetings during this process. We had one in September that was a public input meeting. So we had exhibits that were put up that depicted what the existing conditions were in the corridor and asked people for their thoughts on what is and isn't working in the corridor, on land use, and things that they encountered in their daily lives that they found to be difficult, or what their hopes were for things that were missing. We also had a public feedback meeting in December where we brought a draft list of the recommendations that are included in the plan to the public and asked for their input and comment on those as well. And the third and final opportunity for public input will be at the next county council meeting, where there'll be a public hearing on this item. So getting into a summary of the issues that are identified in the small area plan. On conflicting land uses, employment-driven land uses in the corridor, existing and planned, may create adverse impacts on residential and civic uses. Lack of transitions, few opportunities for mixed uses, the existing locations of schools and concentrations of distribution facilities limit the ability of the built environment to transition fluidly between uses. Congestion, access to I-77 is only a few connections from rural roads, transitioning countryside commutes abruptly into urban traffic delays. Large undeveloped properties. Development pressures on large properties or parcel assemblages may prioritize speculative development that fails to integrate with the surrounding community. Open space. Potential opportunities for passive outdoor recreation or dedicated park space diminish as the corridor urbanizes. Finally, employment. Harmonious balance of interstate employment and other uses is needed to maintain economic viability and preserve quality of life. So getting into the recommendations that are included in the plan, this map that you see on the screen here, that's on pages 40 and 41 of the small area plan that you should have. So these are recommended changes to the future land use map. So this is the map that projects what the county should be building, or what should be built in these particular areas, not that the county is doing all of that building. So in area identified as number 1, and again, most of these proposals are changing the I-77 corridor employment future land use designation, which is employment-driven uses, industrial, things of that nature, that are going to bring a high volume of jobs. So we're proposing to transition that to something else for most of these. So the first one, identified as 1, that's depicted in brown, outlined in black. So those areas right now, I-77 corridor employment, we're proposing that those be changed to municipal infill as a recognition that these areas are largely isolated from the rest of York County. You would characterize them mostly as donut hole properties. So it's hard to have impactful planning on those properties when they're so remote from other properties that York County would have control over the planning. So it's in deference to the city of Rock Hill, we would consult their planning documents instead when it comes to review these items for land use decisions. Number 2, this area just south of Sturgis Road, going from I-77 corridor employment to neighborhood residential. And the reason being there that to the south and to the east in that particular area, it's all residential, planned and built, and it doesn't have direct access to Dave Lyle Boulevard. And as an isolated bit of I-77 corridor employment, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to leave that particular piece there. So we're proposing to move that to neighborhood residential. Number 3, similarly, surrounded by neighborhood residential and even rural residential going eastward. If this area were to be developed with employment uses, you'd have a lot of potentially truck traffic that would be added to Hopewell Road. So planning staff is looking to prevent adding trucks to Hopewell, in addition to all of the relatively new truck traffic that's now going on Springdale. Number 4, this is currently a rural center on the comprehensive, in our comprehensive plan. And we are proposing that it become a neighborhood center instead. So that's just a matter of scale, saying that this should be a node that serves more people than a typical rural center, which might have a store or 2. This would be servicing all of the folks that live in Leslie and all of the rural folks that are driving westward. Number 5, this is the only part of our recommendations that we're proposing to add to I-77 corridor employment, and the reason being, as long as traffic is accessing this particular area from Oak Pond Road, it's at an intersection with Neely's Creek Road, and it has an opportunity to maybe serve as a neighborhood serving use, something like a grocery store. Number 6, this area, I-77 corridor employment currently, and that includes Mount Holly Elementary. So planning staff felt it would be more appropriate to have the elementary school serve as a line of demarcation between the employment uses and the residential community to the south and to the east. So rather than having industrial development, a school, industrial development neighborhood, we'd have a better transition there. Number 7, these are areas to the very south of the corridor near the Chester County line. They are currently shown as I-77 corridor employment, but it does not currently have access to utilities, and it is unlikely in the near future to have access to utilities. So we felt it was more appropriate to reflect this as rural residential, which is the current land use there. And finally, numbers 8 and 9, these are very small areas that were shown to be employment areas, but in context to the surrounding area, it's more appropriate to change them to the immediate vicinity. So getting into the text recommendations, I won't go through all of them. I will summarize them here for you. There are 18 listed towards the back of that small area plan document. On the zoning side, there's a recommendation to consider adding business and technology park and mixed use as new zoning districts. Currently, if you wanted to do a development of scale and of a mixed variety, you'd have to do a PUD in most cases. So having additional zoning districts would better enable developers to do that and have some more predictability on the county side as well. Second, we have consider warehousing, wholesale, and distribution establishments to be permitted by special exception with conditions ensuring compatibility. So trying to make sure with all of the warehouses that are going to come into the corridor that they be approved by special exception rather than just being permitted by right, and with the conditions making sure that they fit into the neighborhood in which they're proposed to be located. Land use transitions. So we want to isolate uses that have noxious impacts. So we don't want a concrete crushing facility next to a school, things of that nature, so trying to do that. Related, removing schools as a permitted use in industrial and light industrial districts. So if a new school is going to be proposed to be located, we would propose that it not be permitted in those zoning districts, so in the future you're not having those immediate impacts between two disparate land uses, as well as losing potential property that could be developed for jobs and employment. This is very difficult to rezone something from residential to industrial versus going the other way. Some of the other recommendations: higher land use intensity and building height closer to the interstate, and stepping down the closer you get to neighborhoods and the further away you get from the interstate. Improving visual transitions regarding large parking lots and application of architectural standards. Monitoring the consumption of land, which is prioritized for employment. And discouraging single-family housing adjacent to I-77. On transportation, ensuring new developments maintain an acceptable road level of service and improve the pedestrian network. Encourage implementation of the RFAT's Collector Street Plan. Monitor impacts of proposed mixed-use site and I-77 interchange that is associated with the Carolina Panthers facility. Obviously that will have a large impact on not only the city, but the rest of the corridor as well. And to coordinate with Rock Hill on expanding MyRide to large employment centers that are in the corridor. On economic development, to collaborate and engage with developers and infrastructure stakeholders to organize and plan for growth. To monitor economic trends to recommend regulatory changes that are responsive to the market realities. Targeted application of tax incentives. And to consider establishing a York County-owned business and technology park in the corridor. Finally, on environment and open spaces, increase the availability and access to open spaces, requiring more to be provided in certain zoning districts with certain development proposals, preserving and providing access to natural features, encouraging meaningful open spaces rather than just leftover unbuildable pieces, and creating a public park in the southeast portion of the corridor. And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Any questions?
Thank you, Jonathan. Will you repeat when the public hearing will be on this issue,
Yes, it'll be at the next county council meeting.
which is
What's the date of? Say again? March 16th.
16th? And folks will be able to comment. I think it would be helpful to at least have the public comments that were circulated, maybe circulated to the council so they can see what the public came out and said.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other? Dr. Blackwell?
Does this one work? This one had no problem working before the last meeting, before we started, but that's odd that it doesn't work now. Anyway, just one quick question. What's the height restriction on commercial buildings around the corridor county?
Well, countywide right now, it's 50 feet is the height limit. So we're proposing taking another look at that, whether it's appropriate in certain areas to allow a higher height.
Yeah,
than
what
that.
is that, 4 stories?
Yeah, it's about 4. Yeah.
Anyone else? Ms. Love?
So, Jonathan, what would, why would warehouse and distribution, what would be a reason for that not to be granted a special exception?
Well, I'll kind of get into, normally the changes to the zoning code at this point, we want to funnel into the recode project that is ongoing. You'll have a meeting about that at the end of this month. But understanding that this is a particular priority for council, we've put together a draft ordinance of what the special exception conditions would look like for these warehousing facilities. So you'll have an opportunity very shortly to take a look at what those conditions might be. But it's primarily centered around having an access plan where the truck's going to go, making sure that they're not going through residential neighborhoods and things of that nature.
I think my comment would be that, my number one priority would be that, Councilwoman Cox be 100% in favor of these things. I'm actually frankly a little bit surprised that we're doing this at a council meeting because it looks more like a workshop type load. And as the next person who will have a, small area plan coming up, you know, it's hard for me to sit here and look at this and determine if it's the right thing for that district, because I don't know that district. And so my number one priority is that, you know, is that she be okay with this and that the people be okay with this, but I think a lot of it's very difficult to understand. And when I look at this, I can't tell you what this area is gonna look like in 10, 20, 30 years, based on what I'm, you know, I just can't, you know, now, if we're talking about some in my district, maybe it's because I'm not familiar with the district, or what's there, or, you know, the intent of what we want there. You know, it would be a lot easier for my district to look at and say, oh, yeah, I know where that is, and I know what that needs to be, and I know what that doesn't need to be. So it just, that is my priority. I think these small area plans, came about because, we saw a need specific to these two areas, and multiple areas, but specific to these two areas, and I just want to be sure that we're meeting all of those needs, because I don't see an opportunity, to come back and do this over again. So that's my concern.
Well, as part of planning, it's a continual iterative process over, you know, years and decades. And this particular document will serve as an addition to our existing comprehensive plan. And that, as you know, goes through an update every 5 years and a complete revision every 10 years. So there will be many opportunities in the future to keep taking a look at this area, making sure we're getting it right.
So part of my concern, and I appreciate all the work, I can tell that a lot of work has gone into this, a lot of thought. And, you know, one of my, I guess my beats with, comprehensive plans is that one of the parcels that we did not approve, for my district was, we didn't approve 149 homes as opposed to 89, but my comprehensive plan for that allows 180 something homes. So even more than what we would ever even
Yeah, and these are policy documents. They're supposed to guide land use decisions in the county going forward, and they are a reference for both staff and for council and planning commission to make decisions. And there may be times when staff makes recommendations that don't necessarily jive with exactly what the comp plan is recommending. And case you had earlier tonight was a rezoning request where staff was recommending approval on something that the plan didn't envision, just because it made more sense to approve it with the current proposal. And council, as you stated, makes those decisions all the time. So it's a source of guidance to consult, but it doesn't have to be the final word on any decision.
I think sometimes we can we can make something happen, but we can't stop something from happening. And I think that's where the frustration comes from. I see a lot happening.
Mr. Winkler?
Two questions. One you kind of addressed, but we've got public hearing next meeting. I know we've got Recode York County going on, and there was a lot of talk about changing zoning and ordinance stuff in this. Are those, we gonna be able to mesh all that together? Because it sounds like we got a workshop on, or we're gonna be talking about Recode after we're doing this. Now, I know this is just a small change, but it does affect some of the zoning, so I want to try to understand how all that works together.
You're exactly on target. Our consultant for the Recode project, they already have this draft small area plan, so they've already taken a look at it, and they've pulled some of the recommendations that are in here, so they're ready to go. They've included that in their draft code assessment that council will have an opportunity to look at. So they're trying to make sure that as we're a moving target with the county with all of these small area plans and other work that we're doing, that they're keeping track with that, so they make sure they're following up with us as well.
Okay. And then could you go back to the little map you had on page 41?
Yes.
I just have a question. I'm not as familiar with this area as Allison said, but somewhat familiar. When you look at number 3 there, where you're talking about changing that back to a municipal, it's a municipal infill. It looks like it's surrounded, but it's a neighborhood residential.
Yes.
But right below that, you've got the I-77 corridor employment.
Correct.
And it's kind of by itself there.
Yes. And
Why
there-
was that not a recommended change, or is there something there that I'm just not aware of that's already there or something?
Yeah, so that particular area is an extension, the part that is staying pink, that I-77 corridor employment, at least that's our recommendation. That's an extension going eastward of the legacy Rock Hill development, that industrial park. So it kind of leaves room for additional growth of that existing park. And we did include some language in this small area plan guidance that says that there should not be any access to that particular area from Neely Store Road, so it should all be on 21 instead.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other?
But since it is my district, I will say, Jonathan, thank you for doing this report. Probably Allison, and I appreciate Allison's comments. I think it is important that we defer to council members when it doesn't impact the rest of the county to get things done that need to get done. And if they can't get things done, or they get the wrong things done, then they get voted out. I mean, I think it's important to make sure that the folks up here are able to represent their people and to look at it from a county perspective. So I did ask that staff provide this overview, because I think it's important that council hear it. But I've never been one to hide the ball. This is probably why I'm a terrible politician. The reason why I wanted to do this is because District 5 seems to be a magnet sometimes for undesirable things. So we get the landfills, we get the concrete plants, we get all the stuff, and it doesn't seem to be planned right. And one of the major things that I wanted to accomplish, that I had council support for, unanimous council support for, was to limit and reduce warehouse and distribution, because it provided very little jobs that could even provide a livable wage, and it tears up the roads, and we don't want to be the Roswell's Ferry Road solution to property values going up in Charlotte, and we're the landing place for that. We do need to have some of it. We need to have some of it because our manufacturers and some of our higher end paying employers need to have some of that, but we need to limit it, and that's the main goal of what I'm trying to accomplish on this. And I would love to see us pare this down and make it more user-friendly, because you and I have had the same conversation. It's a little bit hard to understand, and it's all-encompassing. So, but thank you for all the work that you've done.
One more question. Dr. Blackwell, just get back on the height thing again.
Yes, sir.
So say if, and I guess right now it's more applied toward north of the river with the corporate offices and stuff, but as it comes down, and say that corporate office wants to do a 6-story building, is that just by each incident, they just come and ask for it, or are y'all planning to raise the ordinance? The
So that's part
maximum?
of what we've asked our recode consultants to work on, is looking at revisiting that height limitation. Because right now, if someone wanted to come in and do a 75-foot office building, a nice quality high-rise, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Right now, they couldn't even get a variance to do it?
I'd have to double check on the variance language, but I'll have to get back to you on that.
I have one last comment. One, thank you for this small area plan. When council began to adopt small area plans, I think it was a huge step forward to stopping bad growth. And certainly the one-size-fits-all policy that we had tried for the past few decades was clearly not working and needed to be revamped. And I think this is a huge step forward. I have a personal philosophy that planning and economic development are one and the same. That those are, or at least they are so intertwined that you cannot separate them. So I am curious, has the Economic Development Department and RFATs, have they reviewed this small area plan and given their blessing? Because in order to make this happen, you're going to need their buy-in, and you're also going to need the transportation, because this is littered with transportation issues that'll have to be addressed, and RFATs is certainly one of the ones that would be looking at this corridor very heavily. So have they seen this and given feedback on this?
Yeah, so the Economic Development Department, they helped draft a good portion of this report that you have, and particularly the Economic Development section. So they certainly have, and there's buy-in from them on this. As for RFATs, they've been made aware of the plan. We didn't solicit their direct feedback. Recognizing that RFATs is the MPO and they're responsible for the transportation planning in York County, we tread lightly in our recommendations in our transportation section, so we can certainly reach out to them and see if they're on board with all of those. And I'm sure they'd be delighted to hear that we're recommending we implement their collector street plan.
Well, I'm sure, yeah, that would be a huge move for them. I will say I would like to see RFATs, if for no other reason than RFATs with the long-range planning and just from the standpoint of setting aside funding. There will be roads, there will be infrastructure that would have to, if you use as an example a Red Venture type style park, if a park along those lines came in, there's certainly not the existing infrastructure, there's certainly no light rail, there's certainly no buses. All of this, and that is all falls kind of underneath RFATs, and should certainly, they should have at least be an idea this might be coming or may happen in the next few decades. We never had a motion. Is there a motion to approve this?
Move to approve first reading.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, hearing none, motion passes.